The late afternoon sun bled through the open rafters of the Fair Creek livestock barn, casting long shadows across the arena floor. Harlan Voss stood dead center, arms raised like a preacher at Judgment Day. His silver belt buckle caught the light, and the lines on his face seemed deeper under the weight of what he was about to offer. Next to him, a massive quarter-horse stallion, chestnut-colored with a striking white blaze down his face, pawed violently at the dirt. Nostrils flared. The air was tight, silent. Ashfall was his name, a beast too proud for reins, too wild for any rider, a walking legend of broken bones and ruined egos. "Ladies and gentlemen," Harlan's voice boomed, gravel-soaked and sharp. "I ain't charging a cent for this one, but I'll lay down a challenge. 10 seconds on his back, and Ashfall is yours if you last." But no one moved. They were all too familiar with the horse's vicious reputation. Ashfall had thrown 3 cowboys last spring. One of them had gone home with a dislocated jaw. It was said he wasn't born mean, but something had twisted in him over the years, something none of the men dared to ask about. The crowd shifted uneasily in their seats, murmurs filling the barn, mixed with nervous laughter. "You think you're up for it?" Harlan called out, his voice dripping with a mix of pride and challenge. A deep silence followed his words, a tension crackling in the air as the crowd waited for someone to make the first move. Then, from the far edge of the barn, a young woman stepped into the ring. Her boots stirred the dust beneath her, slow and deliberate, like she was walking towards something important. She was tall, with long, dark hair tied into a braid that swayed slightly as she moved. She wore tan chaps, a cream button-down tucked neatly beneath a wide leather belt, and a turquoise scarf tied tightly under her collar. Her demeanor was calm, steady, as if this was all routine. Her name wasn't known by anyone in the stands, but when her eyes met Ashfall's, the air in the barn seemed to freeze, and the crowd fell into an expectant silence. Harlan's hand dropped slowly, his eyes narrowing, but there was something more than skepticism in his gaze. Something else. Recognition? It couldn't be, he didn't think so. "Girl, this ain't a stunt show," he warned, his voice more resigned than menacing. "That horse'll end you." "I'm not here for show," she said, her voice steady and clear. "I came to remember." Harlan's eyebrows furrowed. He had no idea what she meant. "You're gonna get yourself killed," he muttered under his breath, not expecting her to hear, but somehow she did. The crowd was still as a tomb. Even the wind outside seemed to hush as she stepped closer, her gaze locked on Ashfall, her every movement smooth and purposeful. She didn't flinch when the horse reared on his hind legs, his nostrils flaring, his chest heaving with the raw power of a wild stallion. But Dela didn't flinch. She moved closer to him, one step at a time until she was within arm's reach. The crowd collectively held its breath. When she raised her hand, palm open, the world seemed to hold its breath along with her. Ashfall's ears twitched, his muscles rippling, but he didn't lunge, he didn't rear, he didn't strike. He stepped forward. The gasp that escaped from the crowd was almost inaudible, but the feeling it created rippled through the barn like the first drop of water in a quiet lake. Harlan's chest tightened. His heart skipped a beat, not out of fear, but out of something far more dangerous. Recognition. His grip on the railing wavered as he watched Dela approach Ashfall, her hand resting lightly on the warmth of the stallion's neck. For a long moment, time seemed to stretch, like the world was holding its breath, unsure of what it had just witnessed. Ashfall's muscles, so tense with defiance moments ago, seemed to relax under her touch. His ears rotated back and forth, searching for something familiar in her presence. Her voice, her scent, The calm before a storm, or perhaps the calm after a storm had passed. The silence in the barn was deafening. Boone Sutter, a veteran rancher who had seen more wild horses than he cared to count, shifted uncomfortably at the edge of the crowd. He had seen Ashfall in his prime, untamable, wild, the kind of horse that broke men more than bones. But this was something he couldn't explain. "She's gonna die," Boone muttered, his words barely audible as he leaned over to Harlan. "You want that on your hands?" he added, the words cutting through the tension. But Harlan didn't answer. His eyes were glued to Dela, and there was a shift in his posture. Something that wasn't pride anymore. No, this was something different. This was something personal. The crowd watched, hypnotized, as Dela moved with a grace that was almost unnatural, placing the saddle on Ashfall's back without any resistance. The skeptics were gone. The whispers faded, replaced by a stunned silence. Dela stepped back and mounted the horse in one fluid motion. Ashfall didn't buck. He didn't rear again. Instead, he danced beneath her, testing her balance, testing her courage. But Dela didn't falter. Her boots were firm in the stirrups. Her back was straight, her hands calm on the reins. And then, Ashfall, for the first time in years, settled. He reared once, high and sharp, as if to see if she could withstand the challenge, but she didn't flinch. She held her ground. The crowd gasped. Even Harlan, standing there with his arms crossed and jaw clenched tight, felt the tension in the air, a mix of disbelief and awe. But then it happened. A single, quiet word, barely audible even to the men closest to her, escaped Dela's lips. She whispered something no one could hear, and Ashfall responded. He didn't drop his head in submission. He didn't surrender. But something shifted within him. He lowered his head just slightly, and the way he stood, calm yet powerful, was unlike anything anyone had seen before. Harlan's hand twitched. He hadn't expected this. And in that moment, he wasn't just watching a young woman ride a wild stallion. He was watching something he hadn't thought possible. He was watching his past walk back into his life, wearing a turquoise scarf and standing right before him. Ashfall's hooves thudded rhythmically against the dirt, but it wasn't chaos anymore. It wasn't destruction. It was a gentle rhythm, as though both the horse and rider were remembering something long lost. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Everyone around them felt it. This wasn't just about a wild horse or a young woman proving herself. This was about something more profound, more painful. This was about a connection that ran deeper than blood, deeper than time. And as Harlan stood there watching Dela with the horse, the truth began to claw its way to the surface. Ashfall knew her. He had always known her. The crowd remained still, entranced by the scene unfolding before them. For the first time, Harlan wasn't in control. For the first time, he wasn't sure what would happen next. Dela Ray Winslow stood in the dim light of the barn, her breath steady and even, as she ran her fingers through Ashfall's mane. The crowd had dispersed, murmuring in disbelief about what they had witnessed. But for Dela, the moment felt almost surreal, as if the years of longing and searching had finally collided with something real. Ashfall wasn't just a wild horse anymore. He was her connection to the past, a past she had never truly understood. Ashfall's chestnut coat glistened under the barn's weak light, the muscles in his body still tense from the events of the day. Yet, beneath her touch, he relaxed. His nostrils flared and his ears flicked as he adjusted to her presence, the bond between them growing stronger with each passing second. She had come to confront the truth, but she hadn't expected this. The peace that settled between her and the horse, the unspoken understanding that seemed to come from somewhere deep within them both. Ashfall wasn't just a wild animal to be tamed. He was a part of her story, a story that began long before today. She could feel the weight of Harlan Voss's gaze on her, even though he wasn't in the barn anymore. She hadn't missed the way his eyes had narrowed, the way the hardness in his features had softened for just a moment when she had mounted Ashfall. It wasn't a look of admiration. No, it was something much deeper, something buried. But she didn't need to know exactly what it meant. Not yet. The barn door creaked open again, and Dela turned her head just enough to see Boone Sutter step inside. He wasn't smiling, but there was something softer about him now. He walked toward her slowly, his boots crunching the hay underfoot. "You're making quite a name for yourself, Dela," Boone said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Never thought I'd see the day someone tamed Ashfall, least of all a woman." Dela shrugged, not looking up from Ashfall's mane. "I didn't tame him. He just needed someone to trust." Boone stopped a few paces away, watching her. "You're sure about this? Ashfall's no easy horse. Even the best cowboys have tried and failed." Dela's fingers tightened in Ashfall's mane. "I'm not doing it for a name. I'm doing it because I have to." "Do you?" Boone asked, his voice gentler now. "You sure this is what you want? Taming a horse like Ashfall, it's not about control. It's about understanding and trust, and you don't just get that overnight." She finally met his gaze, her eyes steady and sure. "I don't need it overnight. I just need to know the truth, about him, about me, and about Harlan." Boone didn't respond at first. Instead, he nodded slowly, as if processing her words. "I've known Harlan a long time," he said quietly. "And if I'm being honest, you're doing something I didn't think could be done. But Harlan, he's a different kind of man. Doesn't like things poking at his past." "Then maybe it's time someone did," Dela said, her voice low but resolute. "It's not just about the horse. It's about confronting the past that's been buried for too long." Boone's brow furrowed, but he didn't argue. Instead, he stepped closer, reaching for the saddle that hung against the wall. "I'll help you," he said, voice rough as always. "But don't say I didn't warn you. There's a lot about Harlan you might not be ready for." Dela didn't flinch at his warning. She didn't need to be ready. She just needed to act. As the days passed, Dela spent every moment she could with Ashfall. She wasn't there to break him. She wasn't there to prove a point. What she was doing was personal. It was a bond that neither of them had asked for, but one that had been there, waiting, for as long as she could remember. And the more time they spent together, the more Ashfall seemed to change. He wasn't the ferocious beast who reared and bucked anyone who came near him anymore. He was still strong, still powerful. But there was a gentleness in him now, a quiet trust that had begun to form. The barn became her sanctuary, the place where she could breathe, where she could leave the world behind and just exist with the horse who, like her, had never quite fit in. She had never known her place in the world, never understood why things had unfolded the way they did. Her mother, Elise, had left a hole in her life, one she couldn't fill with anything but unanswered questions. But Ashfall was different. He understood. And together they were starting to understand each other. Boone would come by occasionally, offering advice on handling the horse, but mostly he kept to the edges of the barn, watching from afar. His silence spoke volumes. He had seen something in Dela, something that reminded him of the way things used to be. But the truth was, Boone knew this wasn't just about Ashfall anymore. It was about the legacy of Elise Ray, about the past Harlan had tried so hard to bury, and about the daughter who had finally come home to face him. Harlan had been watching from a distance, but Dela could feel his presence. He wasn't the kind of man to admit weakness, not to anyone, let alone to the daughter he had abandoned all those years ago. But she could see it in his eyes whenever he passed the barn, could feel the tension in the air between them whenever their paths crossed. He was the one who had left, and now she was the one who had returned. It wasn't just about proving something to him. It was about proving something to herself. She wasn't just here to confront her father. She was here to understand why he had never come back, and why the pieces of her past had never quite fit together. One evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, Dela sat on the fence, watching ashfall graze quietly in the distance. The quiet of the evening surrounded her, and for the first time since she had arrived in Fair Creek, she felt at peace. But the peace was fleeting. From the corner of her eye, she saw him, Harlon Voss. He was standing at the edge of the barn watching her, his broad figure outlined against the setting sun. There was no anger in his stance, no defiance, just stillness. Dela stood, brushing off the dust from her chaps. She walked toward him, her boots thudding softly against the ground. "You've been watching me," she said, her voice steady but filled with something she couldn't quite name. Harlon didn't look at her at first, but when he did, there was a flicker of something, regret, maybe, or fear. But he didn't speak. Instead, he nodded toward Ashfall. "He's a good horse," he said, his voice hoarse. Dela didn't answer right away. She just stood there, letting the silence stretch between them. The wind picked up, stirring the dust at their feet. "You're not here to talk about horses," she finally said, her eyes narrowing slightly. "No," Harlon said, his voice quieter now. "I'm not." She waited for him to say more, but he didn't. Instead, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the fading light of the evening. Dela didn't follow. She didn't need to. For the first time, she had spoken the truth. The sun had barely risen, but Dela was already at the barn, her eyes tracing the outline of Ashfall as he moved slowly through the pasture. The early morning mist had yet to clear, and the world seemed to be holding its breath. She knew, however, that this peace would not last long. The past, no matter how hard she tried to outrun it, was always lurking just behind her. Ashfall's chestnut coat gleamed in the soft light as he trotted in a circle, his powerful frame moving with the grace of a horse who had been tamed, but not broken. Dela smiled faintly. It was strange how quickly they had come to understand each other. When she had first laid eyes on him at the auction, he had seemed like nothing more than a wild, untamable force. Now, there was a quiet harmony between them, an understanding that neither of them had ever asked for, but both needed. She wiped the sweat from her brow, her thoughts drifting back to the moment she had first set foot in the barn, the moment she had finally come face to face with Harlon. The way his eyes had softened just for a second had thrown her off. She hadn't expected it, hadn't expected him to show any sign of recognition, let alone regret. But there had been something there, something old and buried. Harlon had walked away without a word, and Dela had let him go. She had no illusions about what he was capable of, but something had shifted in her that day. The weight of the past that she had carried for so long was finally starting to feel lighter. Still, she knew she wasn't done. There was more to confront, more to understand. "Morning." Boone Sutter's voice broke through her thoughts, and Dela turned to see him standing in the doorway of the barn, his silhouette framed by the rising sun. He looked like a man who had seen more than his fair share of brokenness, a man who understood that some things could never be fixed. But there was something about him, something in the way he stood, that made Dela trust him, even if just a little. "Morning," she said, brushing a strand of hair out of her face. She didn't need to ask why Boone was here. He had been watching her since the auction, always lurking in the background, as if waiting for the storm to pass. "You've been up since dawn," Boone remarked, walking toward her. He glanced out at Ashfall, who had paused his movements to watch them both. "You know, most folks would be satisfied with just keeping a horse. But you're not just taming him, are you?" Dela looked down at the ground for a moment, gathering her thoughts. I'm not just taming him. I'm trying to understand him." Boone nodded, as if he had expected this answer. He leaned against the barn's wooden frame, his arms crossed over his chest. "You're not just taming Ashfall either, are you? You're trying to tame the ghost of your past." Dela didn't flinch, but the words hit her harder than she expected. She had been avoiding the truth for so long, but Boone had a way of cutting straight to the heart of things. "I'm not sure what I'm doing anymore," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do with all this anger, this—" She stopped herself, shaking her head. "I just want to know the truth." Boone was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke again, his voice softer now. "The truth isn't always something you can find, Dela. Sometimes the truth is something you have to make. It's not about finding answers, it's about facing the ones that you already know." Dela thought about this, watching Ashfall as he resumed his slow trot. There was something about Boone's words that resonated with her. Maybe she hadn't come to Fair Creek for answers. Maybe she had come to make her own. "You're right," Dela said, her tone steady now. "I can't change what happened, but I can decide what happens next." Boone gave her a look that was almost approving, before his expression grew serious again. "Just remember this, Dela. Harlon may be a coward, but he's also dangerous. Don't go looking for trouble. It has a way of finding you on its own." Dela met his gaze, a slight fire in her eyes. "I'm not looking for trouble, Boone, but I'm not running from it anymore either." Boone didn't say anything more. Instead, he just nodded and walked out of the barn, leaving Dela alone with her thoughts. She stood there for a while, letting his words sink in. There was something about Harlon's presence that still haunted her. It wasn't just his abandonment of her mother. It was the way he had turned his back on everything, including her. She had to confront him, but she wasn't sure how. The pieces of her past had always been scattered, but now they were starting to come together. Slowly, but surely, she was beginning to understand the truth that had been buried for so long. Later that evening, Dela found herself walking through the fields, her boots crunching in the grass. Ashfall was close behind, his hooves soft on the earth. The air was cool, the sun setting behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the land. It felt like the world was holding its breath again, waiting for something to change. Dela's mind was still racing, but she didn't want to think anymore. She just wanted to be. She reached the creek that ran through the property and sat down on a large rock, the cool water rushing beside her. Ashfall stood nearby, grazing, his body still and calm. But then, as the shadows lengthened, Dela heard it. A sound in the distance, faint but unmistakable. It was the rumble of a truck engine. Her heart skipped a beat. She knew who it was without even looking. Harlon. She had been expecting him. It had been inevitable. Harlon couldn't stay away forever. She stood up, dusting off her jeans, and turned to face the truck that was now driving toward her. The engine sputtered as it came to a stop, the headlights cutting through the fading light of day. Harlon stepped out of the truck, his tall figure silhouetted against the horizon. His face was still as unreadable as ever, but there was something different about him today. Something in his eyes, in the way he carried himself, as if he were waiting for something. "Dela," he said, his voice flat, but not without a trace of something else, regret, maybe, or fear. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. For a long moment, Harlan didn't move. Then, slowly, he nodded and took a few steps toward her. "I'm not here to fight," he said quietly, "but I can't keep pretending." Dela's chest tightened, but she didn't let him see her reaction. "Then don't. Just tell me the truth." Harlan looked away, his jaw tightening as if the words were hard to form. "I never meant to hurt anyone, Dela. I never meant to—" He stopped himself, shaking his head. "I've made too many mistakes, too many to fix." Dela didn't know what to say to that. She wasn't here to get an apology, not from him. She was here for answers. "You can't fix what's been broken, Harlan," she said softly, but her words were sharp. "But you can start by being honest with me." Harlan's eyes flicked to Ashfall, who was standing nearby, watching them both. The tension between them seemed to grow with each passing second, thick and heavy. "You're right," Harlan said, his voice rough now. "I can't change the past, but I can't keep pretending like it didn't happen." Dela felt a surge of something deep inside her. It wasn't anger anymore. It was something else. Something that came from finally hearing him admit the truth, even if it wasn't all of it. "Then, let's start there," she said, her voice steady and calm. The wind picked up, rustling the grass around them. For a moment, they just stood there in silence, the weight of the past hanging between them. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a beginning. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden hue over the land, but the warmth didn't reach Dela's heart. It had been weeks since Harlan's unexpected visit at the creek, and she had spent every moment since trying to convince herself that it didn't change anything. But deep down, she knew better. The conversation, brief as it had been, had stirred something in her, a crack in the wall she'd built around herself. But she wasn't ready for that, not yet. Still, there was work to be done. Ashfall needed her, and the ranch had become a place of healing, not just for the wild stallion, but for herself as well. Yet, as the days wore on, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Something that would force her to confront her past once and for all. Dela stood at the edge of the corral, her eyes on Ashfall as he grazed nearby. The connection they shared was undeniable. She could feel his energy, his presence, just as he could feel hers. But today, the quiet bond between them felt strained, as though the weight of her emotions had started to seep into him. She had always been good at hiding her pain, but now it was harder than ever to keep the mask in place. From the corner of her eye, Dela saw a figure approaching, his shadow long against the barn's wooden fence. Boone Sutter. The weathered rancher had been a quiet ally to her since her arrival, and she knew he was here for more than just a friendly visit. There was something in the way he walked, a sense of urgency that made her stomach tighten. "Boone," she greeted, turning to face him. Her voice was steady, though the weight of everything was beginning to wear on her. "Dela," Boone said, his voice low and gravelly. "We need to talk." Dela's gaze flickered toward Ashfall, who had stopped grazing and was watching them both intently. She wasn't sure what Boone had to say, but she had a sinking feeling it wasn't going to be good news. "About what?" she asked, her brow furrowing. "I think you know what this is about," Boone replied, his tone serious. "It's about Harlan." Dela stiffened, her heart skipping a beat. She had expected something like this, but hearing Boone say it out loud still made her uneasy. "I don't need him here," she said firmly, crossing her arms over her chest. "I'm not looking for anything from him." "I know," Boone said, his eyes softening. "But Harlan's not just some old man with a past. He's still dangerous. And now he's making his move." Dela's pulse quickened, and she felt a surge of panic rise in her chest. "What do you mean?" Boone took a step closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. He's planning to take Ashfall back. Dela's breath caught in her throat. She felt her world tilt, the ground beneath her feet suddenly unstable. What? No, he can't. I'm afraid he can, Boone interrupted. He's got his lawyers working on it already. He's claiming that Ashfall belongs to him, that the horse was his property first. And if he gets his way, he'll take him right out of this ranch. Dela's fists clenched at her sides. The thought of Harlon stealing Ashfall away from her, taking the one thing she had fought so hard to bond with, was enough to send a wave of fury through her. But it wasn't just about the horse. It was about something deeper, something more personal. Harlon had done enough damage, and now he was threatening to take the only thing that had given her any sense of peace. I won't let him, Dela said, her voice cold with determination. Boone looked at her, his expression unreadable. I knew you'd say that. But there's more to this than just your fight with him. Harlon's not just trying to get Ashfall back for the ranch. He's using him to get something else. Something that could change everything for this town. Dela's heart pounded in her chest. What do you mean? Boone hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully. He's been hiding something. Something big, and Ashfall's connected to it. The horse? He's a symbol of Harlon's past, a past he wants to bury. Dela's mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle. What does this have to do with me? With my mother? Boone's eyes softened, and he stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. You're a part of that past, Dela. Your mother was, well, she was more than just another woman Harlon left behind. She was the reason Ashfall was even born. Dela's mind reeled. Her mother, Elise, had never told her the full story about Harlon. But now, with Boone's words hanging in the air, Dela could feel the weight of her mother's silence. What had Elise kept hidden all these years? And what was it that Harlon had done that had driven her mother away? I need to know, Dela said, her voice trembling with the weight of her words. I need to know everything. About Ashfall, about my mother, about him. Boone nodded slowly. I'll tell you, Dela, but not here, not now. It's too dangerous. Dela's patience was wearing thin. She had waited long enough for the truth, and she wasn't about to back down now. No more secrets. I need to hear it from you. Now. Boone sighed, his eyes flicking toward the barn as if he were afraid someone might be listening. He lowered his voice even further. Harlon didn't just abandon your mother, Dela. He left her pregnant with you, and he left Ashfall too. The horse was meant to be a symbol, a legacy of what he and your mother had planned. But Harlon ran when things got too real. He couldn't handle the responsibility, so he disappeared, left them both behind. And Ashfall's been a reminder of that ever since. Dela felt a cold rush of emotion sweep through her. Her mother's pain, the betrayal, the absence, everything suddenly clicked into place. She had always known there was something more to her mother's sadness, but now it all made sense. So, Ashfall, Dela began, her voice shaking. He's my legacy, too. Boone nodded solemnly. Yes, and Harlon's been running from that ever since. He can't let you have Ashfall, not because he's afraid of losing the horse. He's afraid of what it means. He's afraid of facing the past, of facing you. Dela's chest tightened, but there was something else now, something that had taken root deep inside her, a sense of resolve. Then, I'll face him. I'll face everything. Boone gave her a long, searching look. Are you sure? Harlon won't back down. He'll do whatever it takes to protect the secrets he's been hiding. And if he takes Ashfall, he'll destroy everything you've worked for. Dela turned back to Ashfall, who stood by the corral's edge, his ears flicking at the sound of their voices. He was more than just a horse to her. He was the key to everything, her past, her future, and the truth she had been chasing for so long. "I'm not running from him anymore, Boone," she said quietly, her voice full of purpose. "I'm not afraid of him." The morning sun glinted off the dusty roads of Fair Creek as Dela made her way back to the ranch. It had been a long week of planning, of preparing for the fight ahead. The town was starting to wake up, the clatter of hooves on dirt roads, the faint hum of ranchers going about their day. But for Dela, it felt as though the world was standing still, holding its breath for what was to come. Today, everything would change. As she rode Ashfall toward the barn, the wind picked up, swirling the dust in small, impatient tornadoes. There was a calmness to the morning, but it was deceptive. Dela knew what was coming, knew that the final confrontation with Harlon was unavoidable. The truth had to be heard. The town had to understand, even if it meant turning their backs on Harlon, on everything they had known. But Dela wasn't just riding to face Harlon. She was riding to face the weight of her own past, the ghosts that had haunted her for so long. Her mother, her father, Ashfall, all of them were tied to this place, to the legacy that Fair Creek had become. And today she would break free of that legacy, forge a new path, not just for herself but for Ashfall and for the ranch she had come to call home. When she arrived at the barn, she saw Boone standing by the fence, his arms crossed over his chest. His presence was steady, grounding her in a way she hadn't realized she needed. The silence between them spoke volumes. "Ready?" Boone asked, his voice soft but firm. Dela didn't answer right away. She looked at Ashfall, who was pawing at the ground, waiting for her. There was no fear in his eyes, no hesitation. He was with her, just as she was with him. "I don't know if you ever really get ready for something like this," Dela replied, her voice tight. "But I have to do it. It's time." Boone nodded, a sad smile tugging at his lips. "Sometimes it's not about getting ready, it's just about doing what's right." Dela took a deep breath and dismounted from the Ashfall, her boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. She looked at Boone again, her gaze steady. "Let's make sure the truth is heard." Together, they walked toward the barn where the townspeople were beginning to gather. The familiar faces of ranchers and townsfolk were scattered around the dirt ring. Some whispered to one another. Others just stood in quiet anticipation. Dela could feel their eyes on her, but she didn't falter. She had already made her decision. She wasn't afraid anymore. As she walked up to the auction stage, Harlon stood there, his arms crossed over his chest, his eyes cold and calculating. He didn't look at her at first. He was too busy scanning the crowd, his usual arrogance still present, but Dela could see the tension in his posture. This was the moment he had been dreading. The moment he would be forced to face the truth, whether he wanted to or not. "Dela," Harlon finally spoke, his voice carrying across the barn. "What do you think you're doing?" Dela stood tall, her shoulders back, her gaze locked on him. "I'm here to put an end to the lies, Harlon, to expose the truth." The crowd shifted, their murmurs growing louder. They didn't know what to expect, but they could feel the weight of the moment. Boone, Merle, and Lyle stood off to the side, watching with a mixture of curiosity and concern, but none of them said a word. They knew this was Dela's fight. "You don't know what you're talking about," Harlon scoffed, his jaw tightening. "This is mine. It always has been." Dela took a step forward, her eyes never leaving his. "No, Harlon, it's never been yours. Not Ashfall, not the ranch, not me." The words hit harder than she expected, a sense of finality washing over her. This wasn't just about Ashfall or the ranch. It was about everything Harlon had taken from her mother, from herself. It was about breaking free from the past, from the lies. I don't care what you think you deserve, Dela continued, her voice steady now. What matters is what's right, what's just. Harlan's face flushed, and for a moment Dela thought she saw a flicker of something, regret, maybe, in his eyes. But it quickly disappeared, replaced by his usual coldness. He straightened up, his posture rigid. You think you can just come in here and take everything from me? Harlan spat, his voice rising with anger. You don't know what you're dealing with. You think you're some kind of hero? Dela didn't flinch. I'm not a hero, Harlan, but I'm not running from you anymore. The tension between them was palpable. The weight of the years they had both spent avoiding each other now bearing down on them. The crowd grew quiet as Dela walked up to Ashfall, who was standing calmly by the fence, watching the exchange with a knowing look in his eyes. He had always been the symbol of Harlan's brokenness, of everything that had gone wrong. But now he was more than that. He was a symbol of Dela's strength, her resilience. She walked slowly toward the center of the ring, her boots echoing in the silence. This horse was never yours to claim, Harlan, Dela said, her voice ringing clear. Ashfall belongs to no one but himself. And he's never been just a symbol of your past. He's a reminder that we can always choose a different future. Harlan's jaw tightened, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. You think you're going to take everything from me? He repeated, his voice low and dangerous. You think the town will turn on me? Dela didn't flinch. The truth doesn't need to be popular, Harlan. It just needs to be heard. With that, she mounted Ashfall once again, her hands steady on the reins. The horse's powerful frame was beneath her, the familiar connection between them grounding her, giving her the strength to face this moment. She took a deep breath, her eyes never leaving Harlan. For the first time in years, Harlan didn't look away. He stood there, a broken man, facing the consequences of his past. Dela spoke one final time, her voice full of resolve. You don't own me. You don't own this ranch. And you sure as hell don't own Ashfall. This is our story now, not yours. And with that, the final chapter of their history was written. The crowd, once silent, began to murmur, the weight of Dela's words settling over them. It wasn't about winning. It was about finally being free,